Okay, so what I really want to do today is talk very briefly about how Jenny and I are trying to work together in something that we've called World War I in the Vale. What we've done is to identify a particular geographical area, an area which is economically challenged, to put it mildly, because of the changes in farming and agriculture and so forth. And we're focusing on that area, and we're trying to work together and draw on techniques and methodologies that we've developed in 3 previous projects. So I want to really briefly run through those projects and explain the 3 things that we are focusing on. One is on the constant academic community dialogue, and we use dialogue quite determinedly. The next is on the multiplicity. She says that's classic of an academic, to get as many syllables into a word as possible, of communication channels, so that actually it's no good just using new media. You've got to use new media, old media, all sorts of other ones. And what I call the choreographing of multiple diverse histories. That makes sense now. We'll try again. Okay. No? No, we've missed one now. We've lost it. We've gone 2 instead of 1. The first project, which I feel less confident about than some others, is one that she did and I just came in and gave some assistance on, which is called The World of K's. K's catalogue shopping magazine, where it was a JESC content program, Strand B, that means nothing to me. It was 6 months delivery period, and it was from the University of Worcester's research collections, and there is now a website with 1,500 digitalised images up there used by schools and all sorts of other people, as I will come back to later. There was quite a lot of upfront publicity, press coverage, so forth. There was lots of oral history generated, there were lots of workshops for carers and various different groups. There were student films and performance, there was a study day, and a relationship developed between the material and the people involved with it and the academics, and indeed there is an edited collection coming out in relation to this now. Right. The second project was something called Children on the Move that I worked on in Staffordshire with the Museums and Archive project, which had a 2-year delivery period. There were 90 oral history interviews done face-to-face or on Skype, all of which were transcribed. That produced a book, which we've given to every person who was interviewed and to various libraries and schools and things in the area. It produced a mobile exhibition, an event, and a website, of course. Okay. God. It's like I sit and wait. Has it worked? Right. And the third one is Aberley Lives, which is one that Jenny worked on and I came in to give some consultancy. Heritage Lottery funded. Operated out of a small WI that wanted to look at its own history for one of its anniversaries. It employed her as a freelance research coordinator. They had regular meetings, open meetings, some of which were to the whole village where people brought materials. I talked to them about the history of the WI and things. A lot of oral histories were done, a lot of cataloguing and pulling material together and writing things. There was a book produced with a blog, which has actually got now global reach. And what was interesting was that the group were so enamoured that they've gone on and they're now independently doing something called Medieval Aberley Revealed. And the role of the academic really was just to offer reassurance and sort of be there in the background. So from these, what did we end up with? Sitting down and thinking. One was the need for academic and community dialogue, this need between us to communicate, and how incredibly time-consuming that was, but how incredibly important it was and how it needs to be front-loaded. And Jenny would argue very strongly, I think, that within that there needs to be a very strong acknowledgement of the expertise that non-academics bring to the project, and that also there needs to be an acknowledgement of the sort of anxiety and tensions that there are for many people involved in doing a heritage project of the sort that all of the 3 were involved in. There is a sort of sense that the academic has to use a teaching and learning phrase, operate as guide on the side, not telling people what to do, in a sense, that people are quite insecure. They're often people who've had a difficult time maybe in terms of education anyway. And actually what we're trying to persuade them to do is transform some of their ideas and their approaches, particularly when you hit the sort of interesting issue where really there are clearly differences between what the academics consider to be a history and what the people on the ground consider, and sometimes quite sort of major differences and sort of inaccuracies would be the only way of putting it. So in Aberley Lives, they were all convinced they'd gone into an isolation hospital in a nearby village. Everybody believed that large numbers went in the 1930s. Didn't matter how much investigation, they clearly hadn't. It wasn't there, it hadn't existed. It was a myth in a sense that had grown up. There was a sort of issue of what she calls the myth kitty, that were known about, but were actually quite problematic. Now, for an academic, that's particularly problematic, and I don't think the answer is to analyse those myths, because that moves you even more distance from their history, in a sense. That was our sort of first issue, academic community dialogue. The second one was, all being well. This is like a nightmare. It's will I work? Will I not work? It was about the need for, if I'll get it to you in a minute, I hope, the multiplicity of communication channels. Oh, come on, if I could get it up there. It's what she would call the 360-degree multi-platform approach, whereby you use both traditional and new media. So yes, in all of them, and the ones that we're planning now, we use sort of media and film and text and image and speech and all sorts of digital dialogues, but we also use very traditional forms of communication, because lots of the people that we want to reach don't either have the access or the familiarity with that digital technology. Some of them, as happened in Aberley Lives, may develop that competence and confidence and go on to use it themselves afterwards, but many of them may not, or you have to move them there quite slowly and steadily. We would argue, however, that there's quite interesting issues about where the power is and at what point you release the power, if that makes sense. What connections are enabled and created by using different forms of communication and different forms of technology, and the communities that you reach that you might never expect to reach. So the Case project is an enormous hit with the Case Chalet School Book Society and with the Vintage Erotica Forum, which is clearly not exactly where they designed it originally. But once you actually release it out there, you no longer have that level of control, and who's interested, who isn't interested, you have to sort of go with the flow. And develop those different sort of interests or not, really. Okay. Finally, we take an approach that's about choreographing different histories. So trying to get a sense that we're both being collaborative, and in a sense that we're also rehearsing academic research, if that makes sense. So you're trying it out maybe in different forums, in different ways of communicating it, in extra institutional settings. Maybe drawing on different questions, discussions, perspectives and resources that come from the community as opposed to from sort of academia, and that I was very aware of when I worked on the evacuation stuff, where I got very different perspectives, very different narratives, very different takes on it, which have fed back in, have been utilised in a couple of academic journal articles that I've written, have been utilised and will be utilised in a book that I've got coming out about it and drawing on it. So you get different perspectives, different sources. We do have the sense that we're trying to produce multiple producers of competing knowledge, and to try and accept that actually that knowledge is not going to neatly tally together, if that makes sense. There are some histories that are not all going to tie up into a sort of patchwork. And we've tried to take a position of being what I would call a choreographer. So at the beginning, you're quite involved and you're manoeuvring positions and getting people together and trying to get them to work together or push them one way or push them another. But hopefully, as time goes on, you move from a lead position to a backstage position, to a position when, in a sense, you become invisible and they take it on themselves, as Aberley Lives have done, and as indeed in Staffordshire with the oral histories. One person went on and wrote his autobiography as a result of his involvement in that project. So we're heading for them to be able to produce shows themselves. So how have we done that in what we call World War I on the Vale? The first thing was to, we'll get it in a minute, was to set up events which, instead of sort of saying we will encourage you, looked at trying to say to do research, was to try and say who are the people already doing the research? How can we bring you together, get you to talk to one another, get you to engage with one another? And so we had one event in a museum in Evesham, followed by an event 3 or 4 weeks later in Pershore Library. We had an exhibition that followed each of them. I cannot for the life of me get that. In a sense, we were choreographing the meetings because we were pulling together various different groups that we wanted to be there. We brought in the Heritage Lottery Fund to speak to them. Some of them were people who already had money. Some of them were people who were already doing research. We brought them together. We tried to get them to have one-to-one and group chats. We tried to facilitate network and to sort of get them to engage. We produced a website and a video out of this, which is out there and going out with bits of extra information and ideas and things on it. We're trying to slowly now build up the confidence with community conversations with the people, particularly in one part of the Evesham Vale Pershore, who are working their way towards a Heritage Lottery Fund bid. And who hopefully will use a variety of different media to both communicate what they're doing along the way to garner support, to build up what they're doing, but also to convey it at the end. So they are hopefully going to produce a book for the History Press on how the Pershore Plum won the Vale. They're also going to have the blog and website and what have you, but they're also going to go out there and have an exhibition at the Plum Festival so that they can reach 25,000 people who pour into the town interested in plums. So it's a sort of pulling on what we've learned from the various different ones, hoping that we're choreographing them along, and then at a certain point that they will be released and do their own thing. Okay, that's it. Thank you. I think that's just about a minute.